Congress should be riding a high from getting their spending bill passed. They have a continuing resolution. They were able to avoid the government shutdown. They should be feeling great. Wrong. They're not. They're in full fighting mode. Between the House and the Senate, there's a lot of finger pointing and the full bill is stuck in the mud. How will this impact government? Let's get into it. Speaker Mike Johnson is trying to get a full budget done and approved by next month. You may have thought that was already done with the 6-month continuing resolution, but that was temporary. That was to keep the government open. The full bill is what's needed. Otherwise, we're going to need another extension, and you can't pass major policy decisions in a temporary bill. But it's been months, and there's still no agreement. House and Senate Republicans, they're arguing as if they're not on the same team. And they don't have that much time. They have 3 weeks before everyone goes home. 3 weeks. The House, led by Johnson, wants the Senate to take their budget resolution and give it the stamp of approval. A group of Republicans yesterday gave a joint statement that said the American people gave us a mandate. What does that mean? We hear it all the time. They gave us a mandate. Well, that essentially means that they won the elections. They have a majority in the House, they have a majority in Senate, and they have the White House. And they won the White House pretty convincingly. So this means the election wasn't close. We have a responsibility to fulfill our obligation and what we said we were going to do. That's what it means. When they say we were given a mandate, that means they won the election. The Senate doesn't really think that the House's plan is realistic. The real problem that they have is the number 2. $2 trillion they want to cut. Where are they going to find that money? You can't just find it in fraud, waste, and abuse. You can't just find it by cutting federal employees' jobs. If you got rid of every single federal employee tomorrow, you would save $150 billion this year, because that's about what it costs, not including the military. Just federal workforce minus the military, it's $150 billion. That's not $2 trillion. Where are you going to find $2 trillion? Well, you're going to have to start looking at other areas. You're going to have to start looking at maybe entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, welfare assistant programs like SNAP and housing assistant, discretionary spending, federal agencies' budgets. Most politicians, they want to be real careful when talking about those topics. They kind of tiptoe around it because they're not popular. It doesn't matter if your constituency is from a red rural area or not. It's not popular. So instead, we've been fed the narrative of fraud, waste, and abuse. There's not enough fraud. There's not enough fraud to find $2 trillion. It's not there, so you're going to have to look in other areas. Now, the House also wants the Senate to send them their numbers. And the Senate's like, that's not the way it works. The way it works is the numbers come from the House, and then the House leads, and then the Senate goes second. A senator from North Carolina summed it up by saying, how can we move quickly when foundational questions are not settled? What's holding up the progress? Well, the House has $880 billion in cuts. $230 billion of those cuts, they're coming from anti-hunger programs. What would happen to SNAP if you eliminated $200 billion? Today, SNAP currently provides assistance to about 42 million people, or 12% of Americans, with the average benefit being paid out about $250 per person. Millions of people that rely on food assistance programs like SNAP, they would see their benefit reduced or completely eliminated. Now, public support behind a program like SNAP, if you're on the left, you support it, but typically conservatives on the right, they do not support it as much. And what most people don't understand is there's an eligibility requirement. You have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to be earning a certain amount of money, right? So I think it's the federal poverty level. You can only have 130% of the federal poverty level. You have to be working at least 20 hours a week, depending on how old you are. So there are multiple criteria you have to meet in order to be eligible for the program. They just don't hand out the program willy-nilly to anybody. So maybe there's not enough support to cut billions of dollars from SNAP. And then if you take a pivot, you look at Medicaid, what about that? That's another program that's been under the microscope lately. Can we find money in Medicaid? Well, even if you're a congressional representative that's a conservative, or you're from a red state, you would be surprised to find out how many people actually use Medicaid that come from red states. States like Kentucky, West Virginia, Mississippi, and Alabama. Many rural areas in these states, they have significant levels of poverty, and they rely upon this program. So a lot of congressional representatives, they're sweating. They're wondering how their constituents are going to receive this message. So a lot of people in the House are actually hoping that you have senators that are willing to take a stand and say, hey, those cuts, they're too deep. Also, we have the extension of the Trump 2017 tax cuts. That costs $4 trillion. Congress is debating using an accounting trick that changes the way the Congressional Budget Office calculates these tax extensions, so it doesn't make it seem as bad on the books. Now, these tax extensions, they benefit over 80% of Americans, but who they benefit largely are high earners. Higher earners, corporations, they receive the most benefit. Johnson is also dodging hardliners who want judge impeachments. You're just not going to get that. You're wasting your time trying to impeach these judges. That's not going to happen. Last time it happened, 15 years ago, and that was for a legitimate reason. That judge was corrupt and they were accepting bribes from an attorney. That's not what's happening here. This is more of a political disagreement is what is happening here. So you're going to waste a lot of time, effort, and resources trying to chase an impeachment. Even if the House impeaches a federal judge, in order for that to go through, you need 2/3 of Senate. You don't have the votes for 2/3 of Senate to impeach a judge. You just don't. So not everybody is calm with this. And you have Senate Republicans that really, they don't agree with the $2 trillion cuts in the House's plan. They don't think it's realistic. They're not even planning on voting for that. Now, if they're able to bring the cuts down, let's say to a more digestible level, maybe $500 billion, maybe $750 billion, focus on the fraud, waste, and the abuse, and come up with a smaller number, smaller cuts. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of angry people showing up at your town halls. Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news recently, but the town halls have been crazy. We have congressional representatives going back to their hometown only to be greeted by hundreds of people that are deeply unhappy. Most of the reason has to do with DOGE, has to do with job cuts, not just federal workers, also contractors, also people in universities. It's damaging economies across the country. That's what a lot of these protesters are upset about. But you go ahead and greenlight cuts to SNAP, you greenlight cuts to Medicaid, you're going to have a whole different type of protester. Those protesters that you have now, they're going to multiply because people are going to be deeply unhappy about it. So what's the end game? Johnson wants this to be able to happen in April. Mid-April, get it done, knock it out, start focusing on other things. If it doesn't happen, well, we're looking at another extension. We're looking at another CR. And you really don't want that type of environment going into midterm elections. That's coming up next November. Not only will the GOP look bad, but President Trump's agenda will have been stalled. So as if that were not bad enough, you also have dozens of lawsuits coming out, mainly focusing in on DOGE, focusing in on slashing the federal workforce, firing probationary employees, and the federal judges right now, they're using President Trump's words against him. If you want to learn more about that, check this video out next. Stay updated by signing up to the free newsletter down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.